Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 Perakim Rambam. We're going to be learning the final 2 Perakim in Hilchos Meiser, Perakim Yud Gimel and Yud Daled, and the first Perek in Hilchos Meiser Sheni, V'neta Revoy. Starting with Hilchos Meiser Perek Yud Gimel, we're going to speak more about Demai. Actually, we're going to speak about products that not only are not under the suspicion that they were not properly tithed. More than that, there are products that are becheskas hefker, which means that even if you know vadai, that trumais umaisis were not removed, there is no problem with that, and you can consume them. We will also be learning that only products from Eretz Yisrael are chayiv in Demai. And I would like to make a correction for something that we spoke about yesterday when I mentioned that peiros that grow in Syria, they have to be tithed with the Rabbanan. But there is no issue of Demai, which is when just because it belongs to an Ha'aretz, and there was sadly a minority, but a substantial minority that did not properly do it, so they don't even have ne'emanus. That is not said on peiros, other than peiros that come from the Holy Land, and therefore it's going to be a very interesting chapter. We're going to learn about products that, because of the way they are, we could presume that they came from Eretz Yisrael. Like we're going to learn certain types of rice. That type of rice comes from Eretz Yisrael in our context. That will make it more problematic. And other products, right, that we from the way they look, from the way they smell, we cannot presume that it comes from Eretz Yisrael, and other mediums, halachic mediums, that will help us determine whether they are becheskas Eretz Yisrael, thus chayiv to be tithed as the mai, or whether they are becheskas from chutz la'aretz, and therefore they are not mechuyev to be tithed. And finally, we're going to learn about what happens if the mai got mixed into other products. So we learned so many dinim about taroivis, right, about meduma. And as we will see, that there is loy gozru al ta'aroivis the mai. Perek Yud Gimel, from the final 2 chapters, is the longer one. Perek Yud Daled is very smart, so one will balance out the other. Perek Yud Gimel has 21 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. Says Rambam, fruits that halachically one may presume that they are ownerless. For example, well, again, you have to be familiar with the agriculture. Shisin are wild figs. Harimin are bush berries. Ra'az rurim are thorn apples. B'nai shuach are white figs. B'nai shikma are other species of wild figs. V'hagufnim, a nice, whatever that is. Maybe he'll put a picture up. The noivlois tomatum, dates that fall from the tree, prior to them swelling, and they have the similar lurk like yeast, which is when they become mature or ripe, but they fell off the tree prior to that. And capers, and coriander, and anything that's similar to the ones mentioned above. They are free from this whole fear. Maybe they were not properly tithed. And as the commentators point out, the Rambam, I know we're learning the sugya of the mai, but this is not only related to the mai. Even if you know vadai, they were not tithed, you need not do it because of the klal that anything that's hefker doesn't only mean that the owner verbally said this is ownerless. Hefker means things that are of very little significance to the owner. There are times that halachically we already say he doesn't care about it. He's not going to make effort to guard it. He's not going to put it away. Hefker, potter from being tithed. And therefore, the Rambam continues, anis is this anis, I love it. Now I know. So if you purchase any of these products from an Ha'aretz, you don't have to separate from it. Not trumas meiser, not meiser sheni. You can presume that they are ownerless. Now, even if someone tells you, the owner, I did not hide it at all, still, you don't have to do anything. In other words, you have to know that they were guarded. So you have to know what's going on. You have to be in touch in the here and in the now. That if this product in this location is a product where most of the owners of land that grow this product will guard it, that's how you're going to make the chazaka, then it's chayiv in maisres, then it's going to be subject to the mai. But other than that, the general presumption is it's hefker. Halacha 2. Habakuros, produce that ripens first, like a bachar. Bahasiyafais, and those that are ready all the way at the end of the season are also exempt by Cherabika, the ones that are in the valley. The Turim and Hadamai, they are completely exempt from the Mai. And as we spoke out, the Halacha Aleph, they are really also exempt even from Vadai because they are ownerless. But if these Bakurais and Siyafis don't grow in the valley, but they grow in your garden, then they're going to be Chayev. Because they are watched. And that's going to be the key. Any product that grows on your field that you make the effort to guard it, that means that you're the owner. Only that which you abandon becomes hefker. What do we mean by produce that ripens first? If all of the produce, no matter what type it is, that became ripe, prior to the people that have fields in this valley, will hire a guard to stand guard. People only do it when there's produce there. So if there's an anomaly and something became ripe very early on, then it's not worth the money. So there's no guard. No guard means that the ownerless really abandoned it to a certain degree. Same thing, product that remains at the end, that is that they are still there after the reapers have already folded away their nets. We're speaking about nets where grapes or with figs that have been harvested are kept on the fields to be dried. Even that already finished. They were dried, they were removed, the mats were removed. And there are still certain individual product that's on the tree, that's connected to the ground. They're taking forever to get ready. Point is the same, is that since you leave the valley without a guard, halachically they become abandoned, ownerless, exempt from tithing. Vinegar that's made. Now here in the, whoever's using the chayenu, there is a mistake. It's not tamarim, but it's tamadin with a dalid. Temed is a certain very, very watered down wine. You know, it's when you have the dregs from the grapes and, you know, you took out all the good juice, but there's still dregs left and you pour water and you have like a colored water that goes out. That drink is called temed. And now we're speaking about vinegar that came from these wine dregs. They are patur min adamai because they have no chashivus. It's not wine. It's not something that needs to be tied. Halacha gimel. Now another important rule. Kishagazru al adamai, when the chachamim bisman Yechanan Kohen Gadol made the decree concerning the mai legazru al hapedes aretz. That's key, guys. Tithing we already learned. Midrabanan. Not only do you have to tithe produce that grows in Israel, you have to tithe produce that grows in many countries that surround Israel. You even have to tithe produce midrabanan from Eretz Shinar, which is generally Babylonia. Here we're speaking about the mai. That the mai is only on product that grows from Israel, but what part of the Holy Land? Only the locations where those who ascended with Ezra, Bisman Bayesheni settled, which is from the city of Kaziv. Inwards, Kaziv itself was not settled by Oil Bubble. They are exempt from the mai. In other words, let me say better. Okay. Just to know the fact, the Ksiv itself, if you remember, they're not even chayv in Vadai. In other words, any location where the majority of the inhabitants then were goyim, the Chachamim didn't even give a rabbinic obligation to tithe it. Shecheskasan mipeiros makoim shenimtzu uba. Now there's another rule that when you find produce in the market, with exceptions, you presume this produce grew here. So if the here is Kaziv, Vilachutz, they are exempt from Trumas or Maises, and they're certainly not under the obligation of the Mai. Halacha 4. Once you know that this is product that grew in the parts of the Holy Land, if these payers themselves were exported, even if they were exported just, for example, to Syria, to Syria, no need to say if they were exported to a land where at least those of us our grandparents that left Mitzrayim, who settled over there. And therefore, as we learned in Pedic Tes, in Pedic Tes, that Omefrishin Mehen Trumais Meiser Umeiser Sheni, which is what you need to do to rectify the Mai. And therefore, Hadvela Hashmeina, fat figs, She'ein Kamoisa Ela Ba'aretz, you only find this type of fig in the Holy Land. But where? That's the key. In the parts of the land that even oily bubble settled in, the very large dates, the Hecharuv and Hashavins, the straight carobs, the Ha'idus, Halavin Biyosid writes, that's very, very white. The Hakamin, Hagadol, an oversized cumin. There, since these only grow in Eretz Yisrael, misasrin demai b'chol Eretz Yisrael, and even if they are found in the markets in Syria because they were exported from Eretz Yisrael. V'chein kol kayoytze bepeiros elum. Now, halachei hachamarim, donkey drivers, sheviu peiros l'tzoid, that bring produce to Tyre. Right, that's a city now in southern Lebanon. It's closed, but it's not immediately on the boundary. It's not mamish on the boundary of Eretz Yisrael. So donkey drivers, they schlep things further. So chayavim b'dmai shechaskasim miha'aret shechzik oil bubble, because it's near, even though it's not a border. Now, when it comes to rice v'ha'edes, ein choishish loyim, there you don't say it came from Israel. Ella kol ha'edes hanimsa chutz la'aretz. Any rice that's found in the markets outside of the land of Israel, but again, not outside the original land that was larger. But unless there is a certain physical mark that you say, aha, this rice came from Israel, like we mentioned before, the very, very white rice. Halacha 6. If you buy produce from a storage houses inside, which is different than buying it in the market, in other words, if you're buying them from the donkey drivers who normally transport things for a certain distance, that is where you have the chashash. Once it's in a storage house, you say that the majority of that which is stored in that location came from that location. Not a group of donkey drivers, but one individual, donkey driver, and he's loaded with produce. So here also, you don't have to say that it came from the Holy Land. You can say that he simply brought it from the fields that are surrounding the cities. Halacha 7. Halakeach mibali oitzer b'tzidoin. Now, Tzidoin is also a city in southern Lebanon, but Tzidoin is closer to Israel. We're speaking about to the lands that Jehechsiku ba oilei bavel. Here, you're so near the Holy Land. Chai b'dmai b'pnei shikrevi yaser mitzoyin shechaskasa sho'oitzer mipeidas haaretz. Not only if there's donkey drivers, but even in the storage houses. Here, if you're buying stuff that were brought by donkey drivers, you would only hire donkey drivers to schlep things from a further location. So here it's the opposite. Here it's potter. Which part of the Holy Land? So here it depends. If he's considered a merchant, and we'll define the merchant soon in halachates, then we're going to say Yisrael. Merchants, he's not a farmer. He buys and sells. Then we presume he bought it from a Jew. Therefore, it was produce that when it came to the Gemar Malacha, there was a chiyuv of tithing. And since you don't know whether it was tithed or not, so it falls under the decree of the Mai. That's very important. The Tagar is very different, remember, from buying it from a goy that's a farmer, because any product that became completed under the ownership of a goy is pater min hamaisas. We're going back to the Tagar, but a shoyna bisman shehoya roy Eretz Yisrael b'yad Yisrael hoya halakeach mikol Tagar goy ma'aser demai, just like buying it from an Amma Aretz. All right, and obviously this will change. That's the whole point. That once, sadly, that you have more and more goyim owning land in the Holy Land, which means it's a matter of majority. Because if you're living in a location that the majority of the produce became complete while it belonged to a goy, this is a product that's exempt from being tithed. Halachates. Now, how do you define the merchant? Someone who's coming to the market. Now there's a whole talk, if it's 2, why 3? That's b'chal. Whenever you have these numbers, there's something behind. It's not stam 2 or 3. It's not hefkerel. So whatever the vart is, 2 or 3. Let's just repeat the words of the Rambam, and it has to be explained. Maybe pamachas, but if someone comes to the market once, even if he's bringing that one time 3 loads, 3 pekalach, in other words, here there is a possibility that he's bringing his own produce, and that will certainly diminish the issue of demai with more details that the Rambam is not writing over here. Halacha yud. Again, to make a correction of what we said yesterday. When we were speaking about Surya, we were mentioning someone who grew product in Surya. That's different. When you know that it was not tithed, you have to tithe it. That we already learned midrabanan. But the mai is only for produce that is from the Holy Land. So when it says that Rambam kishagazru ala demai legazru elam al peiros, legazru al peiros chutz la'aretz shenichnasu la'aretz. In other words, if peiros were nigmeru malachtan b'chutz la'aretz, that's always the key. Which means taka chutz la'aretz doesn't mean here in America. Chutz la'aretz means peiros that were nigmeru malachtan in the countries surrounding Israel, that the chachamim midrabanan obliged that to be tithed. But once they moved, they transported, they imported that product to the Holy Land, and if you know they were not tithed, you have to tithe it. But this thing that the guy, the Amaretz, is saying it was tithed, but he has no nemanus. This gezeir of the mai was not on product, even though shenigman amalachta mechutz la'aretz. Now that it's in the Holy Land, another important rule. Halacha yud aleph peiros ha'aretz. Now he writes good in the English here. When the majority of the product is from a mixture from that which grew on the land, sherabu al shel chutz la'aretz. So you have a mixture. There's no bittul. Guys, don't forget again. The mai means that the owner is saying it was tight. The Chachamim said, no, you can't trust him, and there is a minority that's substantial, and therefore you have to take off Trumas Meiser, and you have to be Mechalal, the Meiser Sheni. If there is a mixture, you follow the simple majority. If the majority is from product of Eretz Yisrael, then you have to separate on everything over here, the Mai. In other words, you don't know which is from which. But if the majority of a mixture is from that which grew in Chutz La'aretz, and again, the key is shenigmara malachtan b'chutz la'aretz. Even if it is b'mekaymes that you have to take trumas u'maistas, but as the Rambam wrote in Halacha Yud, the gzeira of the mai was not on imported product. Or there are other things that we can always presume that when you, again, the Rambam is speaking about at that time. Today the world is different. Today you have airplanes. Today you can find any fruit anywhere. But when you're living in a place where, for example, the nuts and the plums, they came from Chutz La'aretz. Even if you acknowledge that some of them might have grown here, but because of the rule of mixture, you follow the majority. Halacha 12. If you have a doubt and there isn't a majority, what you may not do is follow the appearance to say, this type, I know how it looks. I know how it looks. It came from Israel or out of Israel. You don't rely on that. Not after the taste, not after the smell. Halachically, they cannot identify the source. Ella, the majority. Even though, again, the Rambam began on today's Pedic, that's like the very, very white rice. That's different. That's a siman. Those simanim are from the Holy Land. If there's a majority of produce that came from Chutz La'aretz in a city, but only in the city, not from the areas right around the city. Imagine, even if what's right now in the markets, the majority came from Chutz La'aretz. In people's homes, the majority is still from the Holy Land. Can you imagine? It keeps on changing. If you know right now, you have to know the Metzias. What people have in their homes probably grew. Most of it came from Israel. But now in the markets, because this big container arrived from who knows where, from China. So, if right now you have to follow the majority, Raboboy michutz la'aretz. Umakim shalei raboboy, which means the opposite. The majority of the product is that which was grown miha'aretz from the land. Shehichzika boy oil bavel, then chai b'd'mayim. Halach yud gimel rabu peiris chutz la'aretz bashuk. But then ismatu, the moment you know that now that new container was probably sold, or most of it was sold, chazar hashuk liyoishnoi, which is markets that have in it normally majority of product that grew in the adjacent areas. We're speaking about a market in the Holy Land. And other exceptions for this whole decree. Only for planting. In other words, if you buy a product for its seed, the fact that you bought it for its seed, even though we learned that you're not allowed to plant tevel. Guys, remember that? With all of the takanas they made. Again, here we're not speaking about tevel. Here you bought it from a am ha'aretz who's telling you, I tithed it. Elamad, the Chachamim says you can't believe him. If I'm buying it only to plant it, I do believe him. Or if I bought it only to feed my animals. Or if I bought the flour, but not to make bread, whether I bought the flour to process hides, or lemalugma oil because I'm making a compress or a bandage, and they used to mix in these creams that they would put on a wound, they would mix in flour. In other words, it was bought not to be eaten, or shemen was bought not to consume, but lahadlakas neir, or oil that was even bought to for kevan to shmir, right? Oh boy, as Allah to smear utensils. We still have some trauma from brachas with the waiter with the oil, yayin lekiloid, right? Or they used to have this eye paste, medicinal eye paste, and they put oil in it. Or vachalas. Okay, that's it. So atkan, all of these products, you bought them not to eat. Now another din, challah, the obligation to separate challah is just as chamur as the obligation to separate truma gedolah. And just like Chazal, even when they said, don't trust Am Haaretz, his food might not be tithe, but they said, truma gedolah, he did separate. Same thing with challah. Never was there a time that there was a big minority of people that did not separate challah, because challah is mamish like truma. That's the word. The challah is Am Haaretz. You don't suspect that he didn't remove challah. You trust him when he said he removed the challah. Or v'hamaduma. V'hamaduma is whenever you have truma that got mixed into chulin, but you don't have the ratio of 100 to 1, which is very stringent, which makes everything like truma. Even the Am Haaretz kept that. They kept away from truma gedolah. Or halakuach bekesav ma'aser sheni, food that was bought with money of ma'aser sheni, which has to be consumed in Yerushalayim. Again, even Amaratzim kept on this. He's just telling you what everyone always kept on. It's interesting how throughout history, certain mitzvahs everyone kept on. So like today, in some mitzvahs, people are a little bit lax. Shiyarei hamanachas, we're going to learn kachim, but flour that's left over from a meal offering. And the toisefes habikurim. When you bring bikurim, it's only the first of every product. Now, if you want to add to it, which you can do, then why would people add to it? Because they filled up their basket and the basket looks empty. So if Am Haaretz says this product is from Tosefes Bikurim, all of these products, we believe what he is saying. Kol elu p'turim adamai. Am Haaretz's slacking off was only not to give the Levi the Masadishan because he felt it's only a financial obligation and not a ritual obligation. And that you can say until today. Many Jews, when it comes to a ritual, Isser v'heter, they're very careful. When it comes to money, they're being dishonest, they're not as careful yet. So you have this dynamic, just a reality. We're not judging, we're not saying good or bad. It's definitely not good, but it's understanding the reality and reacting accordingly. Now, Akivan, Sho'amalei Ha'aretz, Misukanim Heim, on all of the above, he has them manos, Ein Tzarech La'aseh. Halacha Tezvav. Halakeach Peiris La'achila. So now let's go. If you buy product to eat, then you have to demai. If you buy the product to feed it to your animals, we just learned, not demai. What happens if you change your mind? You bought it to eat, but now you changed your mind and now you want to give it to an animal. Says that in other words, since when you bought it for yourself, you bought it to eat, you were then chayiv in demai. that obligation is not removed automatically because you change its designation. And just like the mai, that's what we learned yesterday. You cannot sell the mai unless you tied it first. That continues over here. But
had you gotten in lechatchila for your animal, then you wouldn't have to do it.
That's exactly. That's the whole point.
Amazing.
In other words, the chiyuv of the mai has to do with what was your intent during the purchase, and your changing of designation doesn't affect the chiyuv or the ptur. Halacha tazayin. Shemen arev doesn't mean fat oil; it means fragrant oil. Fragrant oil was primarily used for perfume. So even if you had stam intent, halacha says it's not to consumption. For consumption, you don't have to have oil with a good scent. You have to have just olive oil. Good scent is the shmirach, is to put it on the waiter's head so he should smell when he goes to the market. Now, shemen that if you are a wool comber and you have to put some oil on your wool, which means that even if there's some residue oil and it's not, and you're going to use it la'achila, it's not meant for that. But when a weaver purchases oil to put on his fingers, because he's putting it on his fingers, he's putting it for anointing. You know what anointing is considered halachically? Drinking. That's called consumption. And v'sicha kishasiya becoming into Yom Kippur. You know, halacha yudzayin. Goy sheshol mi Yisrael litin lo shemen al makos. So a guy is asking a Jew, can you please lend me some oil? I'll replace it to you. I got to put it on my wound. So the din is, if you know that that oil was not tithed at all, you're not allowed to give it to him. Asur bevadai. But if it's only on the level of demai, then umutar b'demai. Furthermore, and why is that? Just to make it clear, because of illness. In other words, b'makim chayla, even though the guy is ill, doesn't matter. The guy is ill, so they were more lenient. If a guy had oil and he put it, people wanted to put oil on their back, but what did they do? They would put it on a tablet, and then they would roll on it. So Misha Ahmad, once the guy stands up, muter li Yisrael leishev acharov, even though when the Jew will sit on this tablet, there'll be some oil applied on himself. And here is the word: any oil. Let's go to the worst case scenario. We're speaking about a guy in the Holy Land that bought oil, and we are suspicious of, where we suspect that it was not tithe. You know what? I'll go better. Let's say it's truma. Once oil was used, it's kedusha left. It was already. It's called mechulal. Once it's mechulal, there's no issue. That's the word. Halacha yudches. Mi shenafal shemen demai al b'sari. Some oil of demai fell on your flesh. So the din is just, again, the same concept. Since it already fell on your flesh, so it was used already for a mundane usage. Even in the worst case scenario, kfar neschalo. So now you can spread it around. So mafash v'shoy ve'enoi choishesh. The same concept of shekfar neschalo. Halakeach yain lemurios. If you purchase wine to put it into fresh brine, or la'aluntis. Aluntis is some sort of mixture of wine and water. Like kitniyos, or you want to put it into legumes. Laso is techinim, right? You want to mix it, you want to make techina out of it. Well, that's called food. Food doesn't mean you're eating it directly. You're putting it into something that's going to be used for food. But the opposite. If you already bought the murias, you buy fish brine. Alama, it contains some wine. Oy, aluntis, oy shalakach tchinim. Now we say you are exempt from the mai. That was the final topic of this chapter, because the takanas, the mai, was not on a taroivis the mai. If you're going to make it into the mixture, you're chayiv. But if you bought it already as fish brine, even though there is some wine in it, and again, we're not speaking about that, that God forbid, Truma Gedela was not removed. Everything will change then. No, he's saying everything is fine, but halachically you cannot trust him. Here, there's no problem. Shall I go through Alter Rebbe's the mind? But if something is chayv, I got mixed with Tavalim, going Tavalim also oid. We're speaking about the Tvalim or the Sa'oid. Is the Mai, and that its taste is of much greater significance. It's not just a little bit of wine in the fish brine, but its spices, they give taste to everything. Yeast makes everything rise. Hoil v'tamay nikar einam b'telem. So here we don't view this as a taroivis. We say, yeah, okay, it's a mixture. Everything is chayv in the mayim. Halacha yutes. Kol leila apturim en adamay. Shaloi gazru aleim. Im hiskinam demay. If you said, I'm exempt to separate the may from my yellow gefilte fish guk that they used to call murias, and I'm going to separate the may, you know what? If I go right now, Yaron, and let's say I take produce and I say, oh, this is my sheni, when it's not chayiv, and I exchange it on money, it's nonsensical. Even though you are not obligated, if you chose to go beyond the letter of the law and to separate the trumas mas, that is truma. If you are machalal the 10% on mois ma'aser sheni, it has a din of ma'aser sheni. That's very important. Masha also yos. Avol im tikenes adamai kevadai. But if you're going to remove the truma gedoyla, or if you're going to actually remove the ma'aser, then lo yosef like klum. That's a very big difference, because that's called a mistaken separation. A mistaken separation, keheg the shtos, is garnished mit nisht.
Rabbi, does that mean that you can't separate truma twice? Is that the idea?
Exactly. We learned that in Hilchos Truma. That was the whole thing that I remember. No, it's if I decided that that was the whole word by Truma. If I decide I'm not giving 2%, big me, I'm going to give 20%. Knock yourself out. Then the 20% is Truma Gedoyla. But if I decided to give Kebenani and I ended up taking more, then the more is not. That was the whole dinim. The only time the second separation is if I want to separate 2%, and since you may not take it with precision, so when I estimated, I only took 1%. And someone told me, hey, you wanted to take it Kamila Beinanis, you gotta do it again. The second one will be truma, because that's all within my intent. We all learned all these dinim in Hilchos Truma. Kol ha'ir moichlin vadai. If everyone in the city is selling, vadai, you just know it means vadai tevel. God forbid, everyone is selling tevel, and one person is selling demai, and you bought from one of them, and you don't know from whom you bought it. So the Rambam doesn't even need to repeat rule number one, that you only follow majority when it's parush. Here, this is the classical case of the Teisha Chanoyos, right? So you bought it in its makaim hakavua, kol kavua kemechza al mechza. Now, why do you say kemechza al mechza? You have to be machmer. But you have to understand that yesh bozeh, masha ein bozeh. Every side has a tzad chumra, which is more or less what you have to do. Not completely, but more or less. Kates and misaken. First of all, you have to be mafresh truma. Guys, what does truma mean? Truma means truma gedoyla. Even though had you said that it's the mai, we just learned you cannot separate truma from the mai. And even if you did it, it's nothing. But here, because of the rule, kol kavua kemechza al mechza, you have to separate truma gedola from everything, and you have to separate trumas meiser, and you have to give it to the kohen. Umafresh meiser sheni bolvad, v'hareu k'meiser sheni shel demai. Which, by the way, in other words, when other than truma gedola, we give it the status of demai. And you can argue, well, what l'may nafkamina? So ma'aser rishon I get, ma'aser rishon you don't give. If ma'aser sheni you have to anyway separate, stam to know l'may nafkamina, big nafkamina. Koydem kol, you make a bracha when you separate tithes. However, when there is a doubt whether you're chayiv, you don't make a bracha. You don't make a bracha when you separate the ma'aser sheni shel demai. Another detail, just to speak out, that when the owner is the one that's redeeming the ma'aser sheni, he has to add a fifth, not by the mai. I don't know if we said that. So here it's like the mai. And finally, halacha chafalef, if you have two containers of produce before you, achas is tevel, mamish, and one not the mai, one is misukan, chulin misukanim. Everything was removed, like we learned yesterday. Not only the trumais. For all of the achas mihem, one of the containers are lost. You don't know which container got lost. Again, now that we established that when you know something is already tied with Truma Gedoyla, separating it again is nothing. Not over here. Here you have a suffix. And then from now on, we do consider it a suffix. Not only do you not have to give the Meiser Rishon to the Levi, Meiser Ani to an Ani, but just again, that even the Meiser Sheni, it's considered the Meiser Sheni. You don't make a bracha prior to the Hafrasha if you made it separately. Because if you make all of the separations together just to chazer that in, then you only make one bracha, lahafresh trumas or meisers. You'll make a bracha because you have to be mafresh truma gedayla. But if you didn't make it all together, you will not make a blessing for the meiser sheni. And now the very short final chapter of Hilchos Meiser, Perek Yud Dalid. Now, number one, we're going to learn about dinim of what happens if you buy produce from a wholesaler. And the ikir here will be regarding the wholesaler. Don't forget, guys, even though Chazal said you have to separate whatever you need to from the mai, you may never separate from something that's patur on that which is chayiv, nor from what which is chayiv on that which is patur, because you don't have the right percent. So if I'm buying the mai from someone who he buys his produce from different people, even though they all are called the mai, they are all called the mai, but I cannot take two different bundles and say, you know what, let me go to Trumas Meiser, the 1%. Instead of taking off 1% here and 1% here, I'll take off 2% from this pile for both. Can I do that? Even though you have to separate Trumas Meiser mitzad damai, but it's still a suffix. It could be that what you are removing is taka fully exempt. Could be dear, the guy, the original owner did take off Trumas Meiser. And then you're taking off a percent for the other pile, for the other box, for the other package is completely not effective because you cannot take Trumas Meiser from Chol and Misukanim on that Minaptura Lachiyuv. So that will be basically the whole chapter. When do we presume it came from one owner? And when do we say, no, you don't know, it could have come from two different people? Every package, sometimes every product has to be tied for itself. Perek Yud Daled has 10 halachas. And this is the final Hilchos Meiser halacha al. We just had this word yesterday. We had it on the plural. Siton means a wholesaler. You buy something from a wholesaler, and then you go back to the wholesaler and you buy the same thing again. You bought it from him twice. Here we already say, Lo ya'asin mizelza. You may not separate the my obligation from one on the other. Even though it's the exact same type. Even though you bought it from the wholesaler, from the same box of the wholesaler, and you are certain that, this is the same barrel that had that same funny mark on the side. Who says the wholesaler didn't refill his barrel? He probably did. That's what he does. He's a wholesaler. That's the nature of wholesaling. You buy it from many people, and you mix them together, and you sell it. And the Shema, what you bought yesterday, it doesn't have to be from one day to the other. What you bought in the prior purchase came from an Ama'aretz, Sheperois of Demai, which has to be tithe. By the way, the wholesaler, the Chaverim also do business. So maybe what the wholesaler sold you right now came from a Chaved that halachically sheperos and misukanim. That's the word. It has to do with not with whether it really happened or not, but what the halach is. That's the issue when you buy product and you don't know if it came from one batch, from the same person, or from two different people. However, ve'im omar asitoin mishel echodein, even if the sitoin is a am haaretz, so we don't trust the am haaretz if he tithed or not. I get that. But we trust that Amaretz for almost everything else. So if he says, no, this wine is from the same guy, so mimanavshach, right? It's either all pater or chay, but it's not min al-ptur al-achiyov. Then he has the manos. How beautiful. We're still speaking about a wholesaler. A wholesaler is selling kishus, hops, or other vegetables, and they're being brought and collected before him. You have to tithe each bunch of hops or each bundle of vegetables separately, and actually from every date separately. Because everything that the wholesaler has could have come from different people.
How do you tithe a single date when each one could have come from someone else? One small date?
1%.
Start cutting into it?
Yep. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Halacha Gimel. If you view dates like candy, ask your kids. You'll say it's a lot better than nothing. You'll have a little shtiklach. Halacha Gimel. Halakech mi balabayis. V'chazer v'lakech v'menu shniya. Now let's go to something else. Not from the sitoin. You are now going from a private individual. Private individual is either a private individual normally does not resell. He's selling you stuff that he grew. Ma'aseh mizel zeh. And even if every time he came to you from a different box, and even if mishtei ayorois, because the chazak, unless you know otherwise, a private individual that's selling stuff, he's selling stuff that he grew himself. Now we're speaking about a balabayis, but you're not buying it from his house. Now the guy has a little stand over here in the farmer's market. So when the produce is brought to him from his gardens, but when a balabayis is already selling stuff in the market, there it's shaykh that he bought it from other people as well. Common sense. When you buy bread from a baker, here again, guys, what's the issue? From whom did the baker buy the flour?
You said the baker doesn't have to.
But you who buy it very good. So first of all, the baker doesn't have to give, but the lekeach has to give. The baker doesn't have to give because there's a limited amount of money that he can be making. The nachtem doesn't have to give. The buyer has to give. So now the same issue will be, does the buyer, did the flour come from different people? So here's the chazak. If some bread is warm and other bread is cold, which means they were baked as a different batch. No. And shalayom from another chitim seller. Let's go. That's when it comes from a baker. Now we're going to go to a bakery. Even if they have the breads have a different form, ma'aser me'echad halakoil. Why? What you buy now in the bakery, we could presume came from the same baker. There are different forms of bread. Yeah, when bakers bake bread to be sold in the shuk, they make it look different. Just because they look different, it doesn't mean it came. We can still say it came from the same. Manpoil means a bread distributor, very much like a wholesaler. He's not the baker. So he buys more and he sells more. But the larger the quantity, the halachically, the higher likely you got it from different sources. Ma'asemi called fus and fus. There you do have to say, well, if they have the same form, they were made by the same person. So
you'll never have a whole loaf because you have to cut each loaf and give. So
then he's we call tfus with tfus, unlike the tomato, which I get your difficulty, means that if you know the challahs look alike, any bread that has the same form, if I bought 3 loaves of bread, then I can be ma'aseh all 3 together. I'll have to cut 1% of the whole 3 from only 1 loaf, and I will have a shalom. Halacha zayin. Tisha man poilin shloik chamasor anachtoimen. If you have 9 distributors and they bought it from 10 bakers, so vada, you get it. So everyone has, one of them got from 2. So hoyel ve'echad mehem lekech mishnayim. So you don't know which one. So every single one, you say, whoa, maybe this is the guy that bought it from 2 different sources. Now, again, even if one guy bought it from 2 different bread makers, we don't say that they mixed one type with the other. So here we go after the form. All of the breads that look alike can be tithed one on the other, not having to cut into all the shleimos, but you can't be ma'aser from one tfus on another tfus. Halacha ches. Halakeach min ha'ani, if you buy bread from a poor person. Now, what did we learn, my friends? We learned that ma'aser ani doesn't have to be tithed. That leket, shikha, and peya doesn't have to be tithed. So if it came from those gifts to the poor, there is no issue with the mai. Here the din is ma'aser mikol achas va'achas. In other words, here's the thing. If it was given to the ani as matnas aniyim, then there is no obligation. But other people give food to the poor, not as matnas aniyim. A guy is poor. You're giving, you meaning an Amoritz could have given to him a piece of food. So first of all, we say that you have to take off Trumas U'Maisos mitzad damai. And number two, an ani receives food from many. Every single thing that the ani is giving to you could have come from another Amoritz, whose produce has to be, who has a chiyuv of damai. However, here, here we don't go to that point like we learned before. Here it could have come from one person, but you're going to take 1% from every single date. That's already a far-fetched thing. Here you can mix them all together. Now, Amosai, only bisman shamatana merubam, and here we go. So even to be boilel hakoil ma'asa, that's a leniency. Why are we giving you that leniency? So now that Rambam is introducing, this is the final topic of today, that when people give gifts to the aniyim, we have to know how much did they give the ani. There's something called a matana meruba, which means they gave the ani a large amount, and there's something that they gave the ani just a little bit. Interestingly, whenever the donor was very generous, we presume that the donor separated the trumas from the maises. And even though that there is an inyan to be machmer lefnim yishudas hadin Yaakov and to separate the mai, nonetheless, but it's not the ikar chiyuv whenever there is a matana meruba. So here's where we say that if the ani got it, the matana meruba, why could we be boilel hakoil ma'aser? Because it's not your normal chiyuv of the mai. Avo b'matana mo'etes, but if we know that the ani got from each donor a small amount, as will be defined, so then it's like any other demai. And like any other demai, you don't know if it came from two different people. You can never be out of them together. To Danny's point, in other words, even though it's a tamarim, yeah, you got to be ma'aser from every single one individually. Shachak esapas fasodim pirurim. Now, if an ani has a loaf of bread and he makes it into crumbs, or if he took these dried figs and you made them into a cake, and then you took them apart, we consider them one entity. And what? You can be ma'aser me'echad al hakoil, because since the ani got a bread is called matana meruba. Someone gives an ani a whole loaf. That has a din of, he's a generous donor. Generous donors would only give to aniyim product that was fully tithed. And again, there is a chumrah to still connect it to the dinim of the mai, but you can be more lenient. And you don't have to be concerned that maybe the loaf of bread itself came from its crumbs. Maybe it came from different loaves. Halacha yud, final halacha. Poyalim or yarchim, workers or guests that are gathered together and eating. If you remember, we learned that you can feed your guests the mai. But now, now there are some extra slices of bread. Here you have to be ma'aser from every single pruta together. Why is that? Because again, when we view whatever was given as a matana meruba, then having to tithe it is only a chumrah. Whenever someone is feeding their workers or someone who's feeding their guests, we don't view that as a matana meruba. So while they're eating, like while the oirchim are eating, they don't have to tithe it because of the din that oirchim have a din of ananiyim and you can give them the mai. But if there's leftover food, and some people have this illness that they have to walk away from your table taking food with them. So now they have the food at home. Now it's not covered under your oirach. Now, not only are you chayiv, but we view maybe this slice came from one bread, this slice came from another bread. Maybe they were made by different people. And that's the ending of this din, that you cannot be ma'aseh, nachiv al-ptur. Thank the merciful one that we concluded Hilchas Meiser. And it's so beautiful. These are halachas that we all need to know because Mashiach is coming. And now we're moving on to today's final chapter. And maybe Taka, we would have been able to stay in bed a bit longer, but Baruch Hashem, right? The David HaMelech didn't say once, he said twice, or Ira Shachar. Why he said it twice, I don't know, but that's how important it is. Hilchos Ma'aser Sheni Neter Avoy, Perek Aleph is always, guys, just remember the first chapter, or maybe sometimes the first few chapters, that Rambam always goes, ala Seder, min haklal ala prat, and you have to get to Klalim. We will learn the basic rules of Ma'aser Sheni. The bulk of this chapter will deal with the following. The first year and the second year from the 7-year cycle, you have to give Ma'aser Sheni. The third year, Ma'aser Ani. Fourth, fifth, Ma'aser Sheni. Sixth, Ma'aser Ani. How do you determine the year? How do you determine the year? So you have to hold cup for two things. First of all, when it comes to grain, when it comes to legumes, when it comes to vegetables, Echad B'Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah. When it comes to Peiroi So'ilain, when it comes to trees, to fruit of the trees, right? When is Rosh Hashanah? Tu B'Shvat. Aleph. Number two, another din. When is the product considered the final product? Like some products grow, some of it in the earlier year and some of it in the later year. So by certain things, we go from when did it reach the third, which is normally referred to as Oinas HaMaisos. When it comes to other products, it goes Basan Lekita. When did you pluck it out of the ground? By fruits, it goes after the Chanata, when it began to bud. So there's two things we're going to have to help up. The dates, and every product has another point of its maturity from where you say that if it became mature prior to that date, it belongs to the prior year. If it got mature, however you define maturity for that type, after that unique date, it's considered from the latter year. And the final topic of the chapter will be what happens if produce got mixed up. What happens if you have peiros that are from the second year, which is Chayiv and Ma'aser Sheni, got mixed up with product from the third year, in which there is no Ma'aser Sheni, there's Ma'aser Ani. What do you do with these mixtures? That's going to be basically the foundational rules of the first chapter, but let's begin with the header. So Hilchos, Ma'aser Sheni, and Neter Avoy. Yesh B'chlol, the Rambam says we're going to learn all about 9 mitzvahs. 3 of them are going to be positive mitzvahs, 6 of them are going to be negative mitzvahs. V'zeu Parata and Aleph Lahafresh Ma'aser Sheni. During those years that you have to take off, after Ma'aser Rishon, Ma'aser Sheni. Number 2, that if you redeemed the Ma'aser Sheni product, and now you have money, and that money has to be taken to Yerushalayim, even though you took it to Yerushalayim, you may not use it to pay for your hotel, you may not use it for any other real need, it may only be used for eating, drinking, and anointing. So in the negative, it cannot be used for anything other than that. Halacha 3, that if the person is tamei, you may not eat from Ma'aser Sheni. If a person, God forbid, is an oinen, that means in the earliest, most severe stage of mourning, which is the day of the passing, let's say, you may not eat Ma'aser Sheni. Number 5, it may not be eaten outside Yerushalayim, being that God specified in the Torah every product separately. So here also, you cannot eat grains outside Yerushalayim. That you may not partake of wine, right? The Ma'aser Sheni of wine outside Yerushalayim, and you cannot partake of the Ma'aser Sheni of yitzhar, of oil outside Yerushalayim. Halacha 8, that which is considered plantations of the 4th year, as we'll learn, that also, all of it is considered holy. All of it is like Ma'aser Sheni. And finally, the 9th is as we will see, that there are 2 times in the 7-year cycle that a person, after actually giving all of the tithings to their recipients, he makes a confession in which he confesses of how great of a tzaddik he is. That's called a confession, that I did everything, God, that you wanted. And therefore, you, God, hashkifa, as we have in the beginning of Parshas Kisavai, bir mitzvahs elu b'prakim elu. Again, today's 3rd chapter is the first chapter of Ma'aser Sheni. The first chapter has 14 halachas. And guys, we have to remember these halachas to better appreciate everything that we will learn going forward. Halacha Aleph says that Rambam achar shemafrishin Ma'aser Rishon b'chol shana. So Truma Gedola, the Rambam doesn't even have to mention. Next is Ma'aser Rishon, after you separated the first tithing, which is after you took off the Truma Gedola. Let's say the Rambam holds that you chayiv in Trumas and Ma'aser on everything that grows. even on apples. If it grows in Israel. So let's say you have a basket of 100 apples, and you were that Baininus, and you took off 2 apples. How many apples do you have left? 98. The first Meiser is taking off 9.8. That's the exact number. And that is given to the Levi. Now, from what remains, Mafrishin, during most of the years, 4 of the years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, not all of them, but 4 of the 7, after Meiser Rishon, you have to be Mafrish the second tithes, Meiser Sheni. And that Shenemar, a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh, Aser to Aser, Eis Kol Tfu Azar Echa, that is in reference to Meiser Sheni. However, not every year, says the Rambam, Ubashana Shlishis, 3rd year of the Shemitah cycle, and in the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle, Mafrish and Meiser Ani, you will also have to take off an additional 10% from what remained after the Truma and after the Meiser Rishon, but that other tithing is not called the second tithing, but it's called the tithing for the poor, Meiser Ani, and that's not on top of, but it's in exchange of. It's either or. Chelef, Meiser, Sheni, as we will explain. Okay, so now we speak about years. First year, second year, Meiser, Sheni. So when does the year begin? You open up Masechtas Rosh Hashanah, Arba Rosh Hashanah Mei. It's not so simple to know when the Rosh Hashanah is. So says the Rambam, Mitaka depends on the product. Halacha base. Be'echad betishrei, that's going to be considered Rosh Hashanah if we are speaking about the second tithing of grains, when we speak about the second tithing of legumes, kitniyos, and when we're speaking about Meiser Sheni of vegetables. And guys, don't forget that even the Rambam holds that Meiser B'chlal from vegetables is only rabbinic. So what? But we're speaking with the Rabbanan. They share the same date of when the year changed. But that's not going to be enough. We need more information. Like we mentioned in the intro, even if I know the date, how much of the product needs to be ready prior to this date will vary from product to product. That will make things very exciting. Rosh Hashanah Stam, the Rambam says, whenever you say the words Rosh Hashanah, you are referring to Echad B'Tishrei. However, when it comes to all fruits that grow on the tree, right, for which you make a B'Rei Pri Ha'etz, their Rosh Hashanah is not Echad B'Tishrei, U'B'Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, Kishitas Beis Hillel, the 2 B'Shvat, right, Chamisha Asa B'Shvat. I don't think Chazal say the words 2. I think that's a very Chulandik abbreviation. The 15th of Shvat. Rosh Hashanah l'maiser oilanois. Ketzad. Oh, now the reason why this has to be explained is products are not fully ready before this date. Normally, they're in the ground still. They're ready to a certain point. They are already on the tree. You have to now determine how much of this product needs to be ready by this date for it to be considered the product of the previous year. So tfuah and kitniyos, grains and legumes. Let me further translate. Oinas hamaisres will mean that they reached 1/3 of their maturity. And why is that called oinas hamaisres? So we had above the rule that when grains or legumes reached 1/3 of their maturity, if you were now to pluck it out of the ground, they would be strong enough to be able to be mazriya. You would be able to plant them. They would function as a seed. And that's their oinas hamaisres. So if it reached that stage prior to Rosh Hashanah, again, and for Truma, for Tfu and Kitniyos, Rosh Hashanah means Echad B'Tishrei. So if it reached that level prior to Rosh Hashanah, the 3rd year, even though you didn't pluck them, harvest them prematurely, why would you? You let them in the ground, even though that they were finished, they only became properly grown, and you only gathered them in the 3rd year. They are a product of the 2nd year. Guys, you get it. That's the neshama of the majority of the Spedic. But if they didn't even reach this level of shlish, then they are considered a product of the 3rd year. And after Truma Gedolah, and after Meiser Rishon, then you only separate Meiser Ani. Now let's go to trees, to fruits. Now by fruits, oinas hamasres is not shlish, as the Rambam will say soon in this chapter. Oinas hamasres, when we learned this, the guys in Masechtas Rosh Hashanah, we use the word chanata. Chanata means when its buds appear. The Rambam uses other expressions, as we'll see inside soon. But it's at least connected to this general concept. It's not about a shlish. No, there's a different oinas. The Rambam is so organized, he doesn't want to confuse. First he gives the cloud, then he breaks down details. So when he's speaking about this cloud, he dafka uses the same word, oinas hamasres, for tvua kitnias and for peta se'ilan. Just for you to know, they're not the same. But if it reached its unique oinas hamasres before the 15th of Shvat, and even though you are in the third year, you are in the third. The guys, Rosh Hashanah for Shemitah, right, for the years, begins Echad B'Tishrei. Here's the paradox. So I know I'm in the third year. Regarding Peter Se'ilan, if it's prior to Tu B'Shvat, it's from the second year, and it's consistent. That means if you're in the fourth year, you are in the fourth year, but with Peter Se'ilan, you are in the third year till Tu B'Shvat. Chamishasa B'Shvat.
Rabbi, it sounds very confusing to be a farmer.
I know. I'm saying
Very
that's the
confusing.
beauty of the first chapter, but you got it, yeah? You didn't get it? You got it. Okay, good. Even though you actually plucked it off the tree, you harvested it after Chamish Asa B'Shvat, you actually picked it off the tree at the end of the third year. Mis Asher and L'Sha'avar, they are considered from the second year. Why they second year? Second year because the fruit reached its oinas hamasres, which is chanata, generally speaking, prior to Tu B'Shvat of the third year, which is considered the second year. And it's consistent in the next year. Even though it is actually de facto the fourth year, but as far as Peiros Ilan is concerned, you only enter the fourth year after Chamisha Asa B'Shvat. Afalpi, that picture is not negay. Because it's halachically considered product of the third year. No, the Rambam is consistent in both ends of the year. Okay, so then misasrin lehaba halacha gimel v'hacharuvin, which is, you can argue peidos ha'ilon will be an exception. And here the Rambam writes for the first time chanata, because like we mentioned, oinas hamasras for tvuan kitnias is mish shlish. And here, generally, it's when it's budding. So, so therefore, based on the general rule, it should belong to the prior year. It doesn't work that way. And why is that? Like Danny mentioned, all of this is confusing. So since hiding charuvim, to begin with, is only medivrei soifrim. Why, like the Rambam said before, because I think it was charuv we're not guarded. So since there's no chiyuv d'oraisa to keep things simple, they said it has to do with when you pluck it. That's called likita. By the way, that's how it is by vegetables. It has to do with basar likita. So good. Did you pluck it before Chamisha Asa B'Shvat or afterwards? Yeroli she'ein advarim amurim ela becharuv eit salmoinam. I'm sorry, it's not because they're not mishtamer, because they were not eaten by people. And that is why we say, based on the rules that we have in the beginning of Hilchos Trumas U'Maasros, so therefore, to make things simple, it has to do with Likita. But all other caribs, says the Rambam, that are Michael Adam and they are Mishtamer, they are Mechoyev L'Shitas Rambam, Trumois U'Maasros is not only on Tfuah and Tiroi Shenitza, but as long as they grow in the lands, Sheichziku Boy Oile Bavel, the Rambam says, other than vegetables, they're Chayv Doiraisa. So Yeroyali, Shehem, Kishar Peter Se'ilan, and therefore you have to follow its Chanata, which is its oinas hamasres that had happened before Chamisha B'Shvat or after Chamisha Asa B'Shvat to determine whether you have to separate Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani. Halacha Dalid Hayorok. When it comes to vegetables, it's all about when were they harvested. That's called likita. B'shas likitasoi isuroi. Ketzad im nilkat biyoim Rosh Hashanah Shal Shlishis. We're not going into the violation which happened. Rahman al-Islam. Just if you picked it on Rosh Hashanah the third year, even though it was already a third, that it already whatever chanata means by the vegetables. It's ready. You just didn't take it out of the ground. I don't care. It's about Likita. Mafrishen mimeno maiser ani, because it's the third year. And similarly, in the next year, it's always consistent. So now we have, guys, so we have Tvua, Kitnius, we have Pedro Se'ilan, and we have Yerakos. Clear. Now, we learned another exception, which is anything that Rambam says that only has to be taif midrabanan dinoi kedin yarak. And now we're going to learn about the unique esrig. Esrig has a unique din. Chein ha esrig bilvad mishai Pedro Se'ilan. Only the esrig. And from all of the fruit of the trees, esrig is unique. And the esrig has to be tithed according to the Rambam mida oiraisa. But harehu ki yarak and I'm giving maybe, I know all of this we have in the Gemara, but maybe the reason is because esrig is the only fruit that needs to stay on the tree for the whole year. The longer it stays on the tree, the better it becomes. Hadar, remember, pre-eitz hadar, I think that's in Gemara Soya, Sukkah, that what's hadar? Hadar is hadar bi'ilanaim for the whole year. All of the seasons are needed to make it ready. In other words, since it's benefiting from being on the tree longer, so when is it considered final, finished? When you take it off the tree, maybe. And that's both for the dinim of Meiser and also for the dinim of Shvi'is, Keitzad, Im Nilkad Bashlishis. But guys, don't forget that an esrig is a fruit. The Rosh Hashanah for fruits is Chamisha Asa B'Shvat. So if it was picked after Chamisha B'Shvat, which is the third year, Mafresh Memeno Meiser Ani, even though it was mamish ready bashniya. And the same thing, at least everything is consistent. So this complication we don't have over here. But Revius means, again, when it comes to fruits, I don't care that it's Echad B'Tishrei. That you enter Tavshin, guys, Tavshin Pei Gimel is Shnas Hakel, it's year number 1. Tavshin Pei Beis was the 7th year, to make it clear. When it comes to trees, for that, it's considered the third year. If Nilkat Berevius, but after, you need that after the 15th of Shvat, then Mafrish Memenu, Meiser Sheni, Halachavav, Afapisha Holchen Achad Likitosoi. When it comes to Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani. But now let's go to what we just mentioned about Shemitah. Esrei Bashishish means it was fully ready on the 6th year. It got ready in Tavshin Pei Aleph, but nichnas ala shvi'is, even though on the 7th year it grew a lot larger. When it entered, it had the size of a kazayis. Now it's the size of a loaf of bread. If we were to say b'negei dinei shmita, that what it has to do with when you pick it, then you would argue this is completely exempt from ISIS because it's a paydas from the Shemitah year. We don't say so. We say that chayeves the maisres. So when it says bein la maiser bein la shvi'is, mistama, there is a mistake over here, or something has to be clarified, because the Rambam, what he's speaking out on Allah is actually that you are mafresh maiser ani, that even though you go after lekita, but from the 6th into the 7th, you have to separate maiser ani. Halacha zayin. Now, caper bushes are a lot we have, right? The Masechtas Brachas, there are many products of that tree. So the Rambam says like this: caper berries, what are they considered? What's chumrei ilan? Let me just say the words that we go after chanata, and chumrei zeroyim, whether it's a zera of a yarak, it's achar lekita. Right? If it's a zera of tvos and kitnius, we'll see, then it's after the oinus hamaisas of a shlish. We're going to be machmir. It's not one consistent rule, which is like this. That entered the 3rd year. Now here, it's interestingly, we're still going to use the Chamisha Asad B'Shvat to be the Rosh Hashanah, because it's a berry growing like a fruit. Every year, the branch gives more berries. So if it was nilkat koidam chamisha asa b'shvat, from the second to the third, so mafrishim ma'aser rishon, okay, pshita. But now v'achar kach mafrish ma'aser achar. Ma'aser achar means ma'aser sheni. No, you are in the third year, but for fruits, like we keep on mentioning, the third year only begins chamisha asa b'shvat. It's not the third year; it's the second year. So you gotta redeem it as ma'aser sheni, but you have to be machmer. What do you have to be machmer? You have to give that product itself to ani, and with that say ma'aser sheni becomes ma'aser ani. Wow. V'oichel pidyoinoi b'toides ma'aser sheni. The nimsa kamisha ifresh ma'aser sheni yo ma'aser ani. How great is that? That's the meaning of chumrei ilan and chumrei zeroyim. Because if you view it as zeroyim, that's the word. Then it's Rosh Hashanah. That's the meaning. It's Rosh Hashanah. It's not the 15th of Shvat. It's Rosh Hashanah was Echad B'Tishrei. So now it grew on the third year. Halacha ches. Ha'oides, rice.
Rabbi,
yes.
Is the idea that it's a suffix? Is that what it is? Or
clearly
we don't know which one it is? That's the idea?
Clearly. Yeah. Sage.
Got it.
Halacha ches. Oides, rice. Vadoichin, let's go touch millet. Pirogin and poppy seeds, ashumshumin and sesame seeds. Nevertheless, another type. It has to be ready, completely ready, not a third ready. And then when it became fully ready, and if it only became fully ready, here it's echad b'tishrei, guys, that I get, then it's going to be from the next year, from that year of Tishrei. The chein pula mitzri Egyptian beans, apapisha mitzase hishis menesh Shoshana. Sometimes they're not ready at the same time. So part of it was sheishishu means probably a third before Rosh Hashanah. Umitzase la'achrav. Nevertheless, soiver geroino l'toicha. You can gather it all together, and you are allowed to be trading ma'aseh min hakol ke'achad, because pul hamitzri Chazal say you follow gemar haperi when it reaches maturity. So what did we really have? With exceptions, now we have Gamal.
Is that different than the vegetables where it goes by?
Sure. No, it's different than the legumes. By vegetables, it's simple. By vegetables, it's not a chiddush then.
Whenever you cut it.
Here we're saying that normally it's after Oinas HaMaisros, it's a shlish. Here we are.
Whenever it gets full maturity.
That's right.
So this is a fifth category now.
Another category. Yeah. It's called an exception. Allah 9. You have to help. That's why Perek Aleph is so important. Perek Allah test. Habitzalam asurisim. There are certain onions that are called asaris. That means they don't properly produce sprouts. That for 30 days or more prior to Rosh Hashanah you withheld water, or if they are on a field that needs to be irrigated, there were 3. Whenever you would normally irrigate it, 3 such sessions were withheld. Which basically means that you are not allowing this product to reach its full level of maturity. So therefore, I don't care when you plucked it, even though these are vegetables. And then we said normally vegetables is guys, here, since you chose not to give it the water that it needs, even though you left it in the ground, so then it goes after the prior year. But if you didn't withhold the above amount, even though it began to dry before Rosh Hashanah, nevertheless, it is a vegetable. If it's not fully dried, then it has to do with when you harvested the onions. And therefore, mis'aslin lehabam, if you harvested it after that echad b'tishrei. Halacha yud, pula mitzri, shehevi shlish lifnei Rosh Hashanah. And we just had the pula mitzri before that. We don't care about the shirashim. It has to do with the Gemara Peri. But here it depends again. Im zera oil zera. If you planted it for seeds, what's the din of zera? Danny goes after oinas hamaisres, a third. Then indeed misaser l'sha'avar, because that is the rule of zerayim of 2 kidneys. But if you planted it with the intent of having it sown for its vegetable, for it itself, then it will have a din of a yarak. What's the din of a yarak? The shas likitasoi. Now here, I want to just add a chiddush over here, because this product has both a seed and it has, let's call the yarak part of it. So here we're saying that your intent will be mavatal the other one. So there is the yarak of the pula mitzvah that will become batal agav the zera, or the other way around, depending on your intent. Now, what happens if both, you planted it, both you want to have the zera of it and you want to eat the rest as a yarak? Or if you planted it lizera and then you changed your mind and now you want to have it as the vegetable. So here, misaser mizarei al yirakoi umirakoi al zaroi. So here we're saying that it becomes a din of a yarak. It becomes a din of a yarak, and the zera is batal agav hayarak. And therefore, it has to do with when you pluck it. However, when do we say that the zera became batal agav hayarak? That's only if loy hevi shlish lifnei Rosh Hashanah. And I'm sorry if I can't. Everything we learned above is that there was already a shlish before Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, if it's for zera, since it brought the shlish, and we give everything the bittul to the zera, very good, then it can go after the prior year. But if loy hevi shlish lifnei Rosh Hashanah, so if you want to, the prior year there wasn't even zera there. Im zaroi lezera, it's amazing. Zaroi misaser l'sha'ava. And I want you to know, v'yirikas in mishas likitos, which mamash doesn't fit. I know that there's another gear, so I'm going to read the other gears in a moment. Because if you were malakid at lifnei Rosh Hashanah, then it's also l'sha'avar, because the yarak part is mishas likitos yisurei. Avlam likat achar Rosh Hashanah bein yirakai bein zarei misasa lahaba. The other gears are here at the end. We're in the middle over here of halacha, where we're halacha yud, or halacha tes, is ma'ased mizarei al yirakai yirakai al zaroi. In other words, im zeroi lizera, that's what the Rambam is saying, then everything becomes kedin zera. The yarak is batal to the zera, since the zera was, and therefore you follow the rule of when did it take root. Zeroi lizera, but then you changed your mind. Right in the Rambam, you will only use everything as a vegetable. So here we say you go after your machshava, which means that even though it brought a shlish before Rosh Hashanah, but since now you decided to eat it as a yarak, what grows? It grows a yarak. So all of it has a din of a yarak, and the din will be b'shas likitosa yisurei. And here you change your mind after you planted it. Here the Rambam says, "Ein machsheves zera chola olav." Elam came only if you do a ma'aser. In other words, if you want to change it from a yarak to a zera, it's harder. So it's easier when you planted it lizera and you changed your mind liyarak. That's an easier machshava. I think because what grows is a yarak. But if you planted it liyarak and you want to make it into a zera, you need to have an action that demonstrates that you changed its purpose. What will be your action? Not giving it liquid. Not giving it liquid means not giving it water will not allow it to properly develop. The zera part of it will be just as good as before, which is why you're preserving the water, but you will no longer eat it as a vegetable. You have to do a ma'aser. Elam kain, and then it will have a din of a zera. But the Rambam still says, so what? That it has a din of a zera. When it comes to zeroim, it's a shlish. Oinas amaser is a shlish. So v'hu shehevi shlish lifnei Rosh Hashanah, for you to say it goes by the prior year. Because even if you went from yarak to zera, but it only brought a shlish after Rosh Hashanah, won't make a difference. Because then the lekita and the shlish will be of the same year. Avol maybe la'achar Rosh Hashanah. Then Zroya Lezera, if you de facto, if everything was grown before Rosh Hashanah, And that which you will eat as a vegetable will be mishas l'kitosoi. Amazing. Even if it was fully ready before Rosh Hashanah, that which you are going to be using for vegetables will have a din of a vegetable. Miksasei asa ketsasim gemurim and miksasei liyasa. Zeu sha'amru, that's the meaning of the Mishnah. That you can mix everything up together, and you can give one set of trumas u'maisis. What we are basically saying is that the yerek of it will be batal agav the zera, and even though you mix it all up together, since the zera part of it is misased l'sha'avar, so all of it will be misased l'sha'avar. Halacha Yud Aleph Peidei Shana Shniyam. Now what happens? Not that you planted something with the two parts, zera and yarok, or you change designations. No, normally you have products of the second year, and you have peiros of the third year. This one is chayv ma'aser sheni, that one is chayv ma'aser ani. What happens if they get mixed up together? Or same thing from the third year, ma'aser ani gets mixed with product of the fourth year. So amachaya here, all you need is to have majority. That's simple. However, what happens if mechza la mechza, even though, is that possible? Let's say it happened exactly half and half. Mafrish ma'aser sheni min hakoil, avoloi ma'aser ani. Why is that? Because since ma'aser sheni is chamur, because after its separation, there was a din of kedusha. Ma'aser ani, I know it's a financial benefit for the ani, but it has a din of choil. So by mechza al mechza, it's amazing how the logic works over here. The kadosh will triumph. The chein peiros, shem safik in peiros shni and peiros shlishis, based on this concept of whenever you have a mixture mechza al mechza, you're going to lean on ma'aser sheni. You use that also by your safik mafresh mehem ma'aser sheni. Loch yud beis kol hapatur mi ma'aser rishon. That's a general rule. Patur min hasheni min ani. Chol shechay b'rishon chay b'hem. Furthermore, now we're just going to make a quick chazara. All of the people that are qualified to take off trumais.
The end of last level, when it says that you take out the kedusha, right? You take out the take out.
Don't say take out. You are mafresh ma'aser sheni, which is kadosh.
Okay, but what about the remainder? Now
No, the remainder is a chulin always. But you have a doubt whether to separate ma'aser sheni or ma'aser ani. You have an equal doubt. You don't know.
You have to take out both.
No, you don't. That's what we learned. Either ma'aser sheni or ma'aser ani. The only exception was the cake.
Why wouldn't they be machmer and make you do both? Meaning separate.
Only because we don't do that because
and that's the it or whatever, and then do the rest.
You're saying this because you learned the din of the caper bush. Forget about the caper bush. That's an exception. That's the Rambam began in the beginning of Perek Aleph that you either or. There's no both. It's either or.
Before that mixed together, you were going to have to do both.
No, never. No, never. You would have to do from one ma'aser sheni, from the other ma'aser ani. No, either or. You don't take up 32%. You take up 22%.
Yeah,
we're Americans. That's what you ask.
When it's half and half,
10% tax.
You only owe half on one and half on the other. I mean, half of it really should be ma'aser ani, and half.
Oh, let me word it this way. God wants. I'm giving a very not precise number for us to give 22% away. Let me go to that way. And God does not want more than that. It's a chaimish concept. I'm saying, I know I'm generalized. That's the concept. Maybe that's the reason of the chaimish. From produce, 2, 10, and 10. Not more. God, don't give more.
But Rabbi, just because it's mixed up, why can't you just still take half of it and just say that this covers all the?
That's
the
what he's asking. We don't do. That's what we're saying. We don't do that. Whenever you have a suffix, whenever there's a doubt, ma'aser sheni somehow wins over the ma'aser ani. So do ma'aser sheni.
It's not going to get their ma'aser.
Ani will not get the ma'aser, yeah, but God will get it in Yerushalayim. That's the way it works. Halacha Yud Beis. Okay, no, we're middle. Kol ha'toidem, all of the individuals, guys. We had some Perek Daled of Hilchos Trumas. Remember the 5 people that could be toidem, and then b'diavad, all the halachas. Ma'aser v'chol she'einu toidem einu moisei ma'aser zeh. V'chol mi she'im karam at least b'diavad post facto trumas in truma kach im iser ma'aser zeh. Harezo ma'aser v'chol mi she'ein trumasei truma kach im hoitzi ma'aser zeh eina ma'aser. It's ineffective. Okay. Now, halacha yud gimel. Peiros shohoitzi mehem ma'aser rishon koydem sheyikavu l'ma'aser. So let's just remember, we learned all the dinim. There has to be a gemar malacha, and there's no chiyuv prior to it. And some person removed ma'aser rishon. Hareze oichel mehem arai. You are still normally, once you begin to tithe, you may not even have arai. But if you wrongfully gave ma'aser rishon prior to the obligation, just because you separated ma'aser rishon it doesn't create a kavius, and therefore you can still eat arai before you take ma'aser sheni. She'ein harishon kaveh l'sheni. Avol, but once the time came and there is a kavius l'ma'aser, here you can't say, I took off the main ones. I took off truma. I took off ma'aser rishon. Now ma'aser sheni is mine anyways. No. Now you may not even snack until when you take off the ma'aser sheni or the ma'aser ani. And today's final halacha yudalid, ma'aser sheni hoyel v'hu ton habas makim, as we will be learning. Either that product itself must be brought to Yerushalayim and HaKodesh, or its money has to be taken there. Ein mevi'en oisoi mechutz la'aretz, as is like a bechar behema, which is a bechar behema has to be brought as a sacrifice. And nevertheless, we will learn surely that if you have a bechar mechutz la'aretz, you don't bring it to Yerushalayim. It's still holy. You have to wait until it gets blemished. That I know. But just like we're going to learn by Hilchas Bechar, you don't bring it mechutz la'aretz. So, ma'aser shena, there's a big difference. The difference is like this: bechar behema is a biblical obligation everywhere. Ma'asers outside of Israel, to begin with, is only midrabanan on those few locations. So, since we are saying that ma'aser sheni, if you would separate it michutz la'aretz, you will not have to bring it to Yerushalayim. So, therefore, lefikach leichivu lahafresh ma'aser sheni b'Surya. Lachatchila in Surya, you don't have to separate it. There you do have to separate. We're learning Mishnayos after Frisch. The Rambam came to the conclusion. We did learn the difference between Surya, that's Kibush Yachid. There was Takanas Chachamim, there's Takanas Nevi'im. So that which we learned, Benegea to Surya, that you have a Chachlal, don't have to separate it, that's only for Surya. Even though Be'eretz Shinor, Be'eretz Mitzrayim is also only Midrabanan. Here the Rambam says you don't have to redeem it and bring it. Chen Yeroli, Shalechivu Makoimis Elu Ma'aser Sheni, Elo Kedei Lekvei Ma'aser Ani, Kedei Shiyani Yisrael Simchan Alem. Really, the Rambam says, theoretically, I also understand that this concept that since you don't have to bring it, should have applied to Eretz Shin and Eretz Mitzrayim. But it's really, why is the Rambam saying it's different? Because the Rambam understood that in any location from which you're going to say no Ma'aser Sheni, the Derech Mamela, it's either or. Whenever there's no Ma'aser Sheni, people will not separate Ma'aser Ani. And whenever the Chazal felt, no, the Aniyim there need that produce, that's why they were that machmer to do Ma'aser Sheni, to make sure there's going to be Ma'aser Ani. To be continued. It was a great pedic.
Shkoyach, Rabbi. I'm a little confused about the Pula Mitzri for sure, because we learned that the whole thing that it goes by the time of when it's completed, which is, that was kind of like a chiddush.
That's only if you planted it liyarak, then. That's only if you planted it liyarak.
Yeah, but then afterwards, when it said there was a switch from the seeds to the yarak, you go after lakita, which is really that's what we do for yarak. So it was strange. And by the way, Rabbi, anise, that's what they make licorice from. You know anise.
Now I know anise. I saw the picture. That picture.
Anise. That's the Sephardim. They love their anise.
They love their anise. Sephardim. All right, shkoyach.
Rabbi, good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, guys. You're not here, Danny?
Toronto.
You're in Toronto. Wow.
Yeah,
What's that?